When we think about the titans of finance, a few names come to mind. If you think historically, you'd certainly list JP Morgan or David Rockefeller, to name a couple. But if you think of current times, there are a few names that certainly belong on the list, and most of them happen to be hedge fund managers or private equity fund founders, in addition to superstar investor and unmatched legend Warren Buffett. The list includes David Rubenstein of Carlyle, Steve Schwarzman of Blackstone, Henry Kravis of KKR, Leon Black of Apollo, Paul Singer of Elliott Management, Bill Ackman of Pershing Square, James Simmons of Renaissance Technology, Ray Dalio of Bridgewater. But the one that really stands out is the one nicknamed the Hedge Fund King, Steve Cohen. Let's talk a bit more about Steve Cohen, who was born on the 11th of June 1956. Into a Jewish family living in Great Neck in the state of New York. Steve's father was a garment manufacturer and his mother was a piano teacher. And he was the third of 7 children and appeared to show 2 big passions growing up, one for soccer, but the second for poker. Now interestingly, many people think of poker as a game of luck, but it's actually a heavily mathematical game if you play it at the highest levels. And Steve's passion for this game can be seen almost as a prelude for his prowess to betting on the stock market, with of course the help of a great mathematical and financial brain. He's been married twice, first to Patricia Fink, with whom he's had 2 children, and secondly to Alexandra Cohen, with whom he's had 4 children. And they all live in Greenwich, and that's not the one near London, but the one in Connecticut, which is pretty much the place, the big city inhabited by billionaire hedge fund managers all over. Steve went to the prestigious Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, and from there he graduated with a degree in economics in 1978. But once he finished school, Cohen headed to the natural place where a young, ambitious guy with a degree in economics would of course go to, and that is Wall Street, which is somewhat of a casino on steroids, as I like to call it. He started as an options arbitrage junior trader, and his star started to shine from very early on. In just a few years, Cohen was running his own team of traders at the firm he started at called Gruntle & Co. Steve Cohen then founded his own firm, SAC Capital, in 1992, with $10 million of his own money and $10 million of investors' money. And by 2009, he was managing a $14 billion fund. Now that's the definition of a cash cow. This guy was highly respected as a money manager that could consistently beat the market and make his investors, and of course himself, very, very rich. But being in the spotlight often leads to trouble, and it was no different for Steve Cohen. After several decades of stardom amongst global investors, US investigators came knocking on his door. In 2013, an insider trading investigation cast a veil of doubt on the trading conduct of SAC Capital, which the prosecutors described as the only time until then that an insider trading charge had been levelled against a whole hedge fund. Cohen was only charged for not appropriately supervising his employees, and notably a trader, Matthew Martoma, who was accused of trading on insider information, which of course is illegal, with respect to a drug that was pending approval. Now I can go into more of the details of this case if you guys are interested in hearing about it, and if you are, please comment below and let me know. But the long and short of this story resulted in Steve Cohen being temporarily banned from running a hedge fund with money other than his own and his family's fortune. So for that reason, Steve created a family office called Point 72 Asset Management. He invested under this new structure until early 2017, which was the date under the settlement agreement he made with the US Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. From then, he could restart taking outside investors' money. Now, we're no prosecutor and we do believe that everyone is innocent till proven guilty. But it is relevant to mention that earlier on in his career, the SEC had developed suspicions that Steve Cohen may have been using insider information to make very successful investments. But note that back in the 80s, when these events were occurring, the technology available to law enforcement was nowhere near close to what they have today. So prosecuting and finding evidence for these types of cases was much, much harder than it is today. But in particular, the SEC accused Steve Cohen of having used inside information to trade on the merger between RCA and General Electric in 1985. But when called to testify in connection with the investigation, Steve Cohen pled the fifth, as people say in the US, which essentially means he refused to answer questions on the basis of his right against self-incrimination. Now, the Fifth Amendment of the US Constitution gives a defendant in a criminal case the right not to testify, in fear that they may incriminate themselves by doing so. It's all very complicated and legal stuff, but basically, he chose, as he was entitled to, not to answer the SEC's questions. And as you can predict, for someone that has been so successful as an investor, the money came pouring in, with Steve raising $10 billion when he restarted investing other people's money, and more recently, another $500 to $900 million for a new fund called .72 Hyperscale, which is focused on investing in private companies. As you can imagine, running a very successful fund, or funds on Wall Street, is extremely lucrative, and Steve Cohen is clearly one of the richest hedge fund managers around. Estimates of his net worth vary significantly, depending on sources, but just to give you a sense of scale, Forbes magazine estimated his worth to be around $13 billion in 2016, and that made him the 30th richest person in the US. He apparently made $1 billion in 2005 and $1.3 billion in 2019. Now, can you imagine that? I bet you his bank called him to check if someone had misplaced a couple of zeros on his paycheck. Now, many people have speculated as to whether Bobby Axelrod from the TV series Billions, distributed by Showtime, is somewhat inspired by Steve Cohen. Others believe it's more based on Bill Ackman of Pershing Square. And a few others, including myself, think it's actually a blend of the two together. Nobody will ever know for sure, but let me know what you guys think once you check out an episode of Billions, and of course this video. In addition to making money for his investors, Steve Cohen is heavily involved in giving back to his community on a number of initiatives that span across education, health, the arts and culture, and with the bulk of his and his wife Alexandra's donations being directed towards beneficiaries in the New York area. He serves on the board of trustees of the Robin Hood Foundation, which itself is a philanthropic body supported by some of the richest finance guys in New York. And one of the numerous ways they help the Robin Hood Foundation is to present some of their best investment ideas at conferences, which are organised by the foundation. And I guess that's a great way to attract people with lots of money who want to learn from super investors like Steve Cohen and are happy to pay something to charity for such a privilege. But Steve, more interestingly, was in the mainstream sports news recently because he bought his favourite baseball team, the New York Mets, for a whopping reported value of $2.4 billion. Now that's quite some cash. And that doesn't include what is likely to want to spend to bring the team to a level where they're competitive and can maybe even win a championship. And if they don't, they certainly can't say it was for lack of money. Now, there were some delays in that purchase because the City of New York, who owns the land on which Citi Field, the place where the Mets play, had to sign off on the deal and spent some time reviewing whether the past investigations into Steve's firm, which never resulted in a personal conviction against him, could be a reason to block the deal. But the whole thing ended positively for Steve, and he is now the proud owner of the New York Mets. So, good luck, Steve Cohen. Let's see if you become the king of baseball, in addition to being the hedge fund king. Steve Cohen can't strike out on this one. He's got to be all in, and so are the New York Mets fans.